Hi, it's Scott Vogel on sex addiction. I'm going to answer the question, how do women become sex addicts? Women develop sex addiction basically the same as men do, only it oftentimes takes a different form than it does in men that a lot of times makes it harder to recognize. Unlike addictions that involve drugs, or other behaviors such as gambling, alcoholism, food, sex addiction comes with far more cultural baggage. You see, our society tends to look at men as the sexual aggressor. They're the ones who are looking for it, and the more they get it, the better off. They are the Don Juans, the studs. Women, meanwhile, are seen as targets of this behavior. And for them, having a lot of sex can get them labeled as a whore, promiscuous, or a slut. You see, the culture sees women as beings who do not generally want sex and have to be coerced or seduced or talked into it somehow. Of course, these are sweeping generalities, and they vary from place to place and social circle to social circle, but hints of it can be seen pretty much everywhere. It doesn't mean that women cannot get a sex addiction, but it does mean a sex-addicted woman's behavior and motivation may be slightly different than that of a man. So, what sets off a sex addiction? When a person, male or female, begins using sex to what we call run interference on unwanted feelings and emotions, that starts to set off a sex addiction. Now let's face it, sex feels good and releases these amazing chemicals in the brain that drown out any other chemical that may cause a person to feel bad or uncomfortable. The person seeking sex does so because they're aroused from something. Now, a hyperactive sex drive can help play a role in the development of a sex addiction, because somebody that's hyperactive with sex is having sex to avoid something else, not just for the simple pleasure of having sex. What happens is the behavior becomes a full sex addiction when the behaviors cause problems for the person, and any attempts to stop the behavior fail. That's when a woman becomes a sex addict, when she can't stop the behaviors that she doesn't want in her life. Now, it tends to be different for women in some different ways. You see, women at times seek a high that comes from the romance, the chase, from being in love. Even though the relationship that they're in has little connection with these two things, what they're looking for is this high of the chase, of being addicted to romance and love, which is why there's also Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, for many who are addicted to the experience of falling in love over and over again. Now, a man might be content with the physical sex act. A woman is likely to go after the emotional high. And the emotional high is what happens at the beginning of a relationship. The excitement, the newness, the flirting, the nuances, the discovery. But with a woman sex addict, she'll go from one partner to another, seeking that high over and over again. And as soon as she comes down from that high, she'll leave the previous relationship when that high wears off to get the high, the fix from the next one. Of course, in some cases, the female involved is married and in a solid relationship and will cheat on her significant other in seeking those powerful first date emotions and highs. Now, as the cycle goes on, the woman will often enter these relationships seeking this high with greater frequency and will express a greater and greater enthusiasm for them at the outset. The excitement will just get so much more intense, and she may start using physical sex to secure that relationship and ignore the dangers involved. I mean, the dangers could be unwanted pregnancy, of course, sexually transmitted diseases, or sexually transmitted illnesses. These are the negative consequences of the actions that she just can't stop because she's suffering from a sex addiction, and all she wants is that high, that love, that romance, that sex, that need, that excitement that comes along with it. Now, how a woman obtains sex because of different cultural expectations can also showcase itself in some manipulative behaviors rather than direct ones. You know, a male will simply go out and seek a prostitute, go to a strip club, whereas a female is more likely to choose a different route. Possibly she'll put herself in situations that make her vulnerable to sexual advancements, or just not be picky in her romantic partners. She may go out drinking heavily, she may become provocative, she may become promiscuous in attracting men to her vulnerable situation. Women can also fall into heavy use of pornography and masturbation in developing their sex addiction. There's a little science that says men are more affected by visual stimulation sexually than women. Now, in a female, this behavior is less likely to be seen because they're not out for the visual stimulation. A lot of women get involved in internet relationships, internet dating, social media, texting, chatting, because it's got the high of the love, the romance, the excitement of all that. Some sex-addicted women at times lean towards forms of exhibitionism. They'll wear overly revealing clothing. They'll put an excessive amount of time into sexualizing their appearance with makeup and clothing, and sometimes even accidentally reveal themselves to men. Now, the cultural norms and mores can muddy the waters here, because identifying sex addiction and its behaviors in a woman is difficult. Because how revealing is too revealing? Is a woman exposing herself in some situation that's less likely to be a problem than if a man were to do it in the same way? It could matter when it comes to linking negative consequences to the sexual behaviors, though. The behaviors of female sex addicts in some cases might come off as more socially acceptable than they would on a male. For example, a woman that's dancing in a club that becomes overly aggressive might be met with a different reaction than it would be for a man. A man would be seen as trying to dominate or as a predator, where a woman is just dancing to express herself. I mean, the same holds true with flirting. I mean, a woman can flirt and probably get away with a lot more than a man who can be seen as pushy. Now, the acts are the same, and what they're doing is they're still creating that feel-good brain chemical to get rid of the unwanted negative thoughts, feelings, and emotions. And at some point, the intensity will have to increase in these behaviors that will ultimately lead to problems, because the symptoms of sex addiction start with the intensification and the inability to stop a lot of the behaviors. So women are labeled as whores, sluts, or promiscuous if they're overly sexual, which is an overgeneralization, but is often seen as true in our society. Now, sex is used by women and men, but women use it to run interference for negative feelings and emotions in situations, and that's when it starts to become sexually addictive. When things go wrong, immediately the brain says, well, let's feel better and let's go have sex. Avoidance of the pain or stress in life or responsibility leading to sex sets up an addiction. It results in problems when you don't deal with the real issues. When you use sex to escape, it starts to develop the addiction. Now, remember, women more so than men seek the high of the newness of a romance, of a relationship, of love, of the whole courtship process. Some women use manipulation to get what they want with sex. Some women have learned that they can use sex to manipulate men to get what they want. Now, in new relationships, a woman will get the high and the satisfaction, and as soon as the high wears off, they'll want to be on to the next. These behaviors we talked about will increase in frequency and enthusiasm and can lead to some really negative challenges. Please visit our YouTube channel on sex addiction for more videos on sex addiction and recovery from sex addiction. Go to www.onsexaddiction.com for a free video explaining what sex addiction is, the 7 symptoms of sex addiction, the 4 traumas of sex addiction, the 4 negative faulty core beliefs set up by those 4 traumas of sex addiction, and the solution in recovery, the 7 paths to success in recovery from sex addiction. You'll also find more information about sex addiction and sex addiction recovery, as well as articles and videos. This is Scott Vogel on sex addiction.